I also would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak here. I was also here last year as Elena, and I was also very pleased to come this year again. Now, let me try to find my slides. If I can get help, I would appreciate. But till my slides appear, let me start my talk. Okay. Yes, that's it. That's it. Okay. Thank you. So I will also talk about growth challenges in Europe. Hopefully, you will also see my slides and not just me. Yes, here it is. Okay. And I have the privilege of being fully independent, and I would like to use my privilege. And I think it's extremely good scheduling that I'm between the two commission speakers, because I hope I can provoke them a little bit. At the same time, I will also acknowledge the many efforts and the extremely long work hours they are doing. So let me start with two charts before going to the discussion. I take a little bit longer look using the IMF forecasts, which are available till 2017, and this chart shows the real GDP growth rates for the advanced economies, for the United States, the European Union, and the Euro area. And what we see is that, I mean, during the deep crisis year 2009, I mean, the impact was broadly similar. Europe was hit somewhat harder. And also the initial recovery was also more or less similar. I mean, Europe was somewhat weaker, but not much. But in Europe, we are heading toward a so-called second dip or a double dip, while in the other advanced economies, this is not really the case. And also the European Union constitutes a large part of the other advanced economies. If you look at the United States, I mean, we can see a quite robust real GDP growth outlook, as also Elena has mentioned. And the next chart, which may be a bit more complicated, shows the forecast revisions by the IMF. I use the IMF because the IMF is very brave. They provide forecasts for 5 years ahead. The Commission only used to provide forecasts for about 1 or 2 years ahead. So I use this forecast. So what this chart shows is first the forecast which was made in October 2007, 5 years ahead. Then the next line, the red one, shows the forecast which was made a year later, October 2008, again 5 years ahead, and so on and so on. And what you can see first on the right-hand side, that I mean, certainly there was a forecast revision. This is a GDP level forecast revision for all countries, or most countries, including the US. But for the US, recently forecasts have stabilized, and for example, from the last year to this year, there was no forecast revision almost at all. You cannot really discriminate the lines for September 2011 and October this year. But for the Euro area, there was unfortunately a marked additional downward revision in forecast, and as you can see. And also still in 2007, I mean, the growth outlook of Europe and US look broadly similar. I also put the number. In 2007, it was expected that the Euro area would grow to 111% of the 2007 value, while the US would grow to 114%, so a little bit better for the US, but broadly similar. But if you look at now the forecast, they are very much different. Now, so after these two introducing charts, these are the 4 issues that I would like to talk about. So the first question I would like to address is that why does Europe lagging behind? Then I will come to some specific problems of Southern Europe. That will be an overlap with what Elena has said, so I will try to be brief on that. I'll be very brief on the EU policy response, and finally I will discuss what should be done. I also had to acknowledge that I did not yet have time to digest the report that was published yesterday by the Commission, so hopefully in the discussion we can also discuss that. Now, the first question is that why does Europe lag behind? And basically here I listed 4 major issues. One is macroeconomic, The second one is microeconomic. The third one, which only relates to the euro area, that I call euro exit fears. And the fourth one, which is related to that I call executive power. Now, the macroeconomic stance, there was a marked difference between the policy stance in the United States and the euro area. I mean, Elena also described that in Europe there was a major focus on fiscal consolidation, very importantly growth-friendly fiscal consolidation, but there was a major focus on fiscal consolidation. And she also very nicely described that this is extremely challenging at a time when there are banking sector problems, and in some countries the private sector has excessive debt, and they wish to decrease their indebtedness. Now, in the US, what they did is basically they tried to address the banking system very early on with very effective stress tests and policies toward the banks. I mean, the government decided basically to compensate the lost demand from the private sector. So basically, it gave time to the private sector to deleverage. Now, the consequence of that was also certainly that the US had much higher budget deficit and public debt, as I show in this chart. Here I just plot two basic indicators, the general government balance and the general government gross debt for the euro area and the US, again forecast up to 2017. And clearly there was a major difference. I mean, the budget deficit in the US was almost 14% in 2009, but in the euro area it just exceeded slightly 6%, and it's converging toward a balanced budget by 2017. Also on the public debt, the euro area was basically successful in stabilizing public debt and is expected to fall, while in the US there was a much dramatic increase in public debt. So there was clearly this outcome, and this fiscal problem in the US has to be solved sooner or later. Yet the way US addressed this problem was able to support economic growth. And also if you look at, for example, the unemployment rate, I mean, 3 years ago, the unemployment rate in the US and the euro area was broadly similar. Now, what happened since then is that in the US, job creation started and the unemployment rate fell to above 8%, while in the euro area it stayed constantly at a very high level. So clearly the US has and will have a fiscal adjustment issue in the future, but in the meantime they were able to create jobs and help the revival of economic growth. So I think this difference in the macro policy stance is very important. Now, another difference is the microeconomic differences, which we can call structural weaknesses. I mean, we all know that in Europe and in the euro area, economies are much less flexible, much more limited labor mobility across the European Union and also in the euro area, which was, I mean, we always know these problems, but when I mean, the music was playing and the economy was booming. It was not that severe, even though also Europe unfortunately did not have a very spectacular growth performance before the crisis. But when the crisis hit, it indeed became a major issue. For example, I just read a very interesting study comparing the adjustment of Spain, a euro area country, Latvia, a country with fixed exchange rate but not in the euro, and Arizona, a state in the United States, and it showed that basically in Arizona there was a major labor mobility which helped to alleviate the problems. Why this is not, I mean, also migration is accelerating in Europe, but still Spain and also Latvia are in a deep trouble. Now the third issue here, which I think is very important, is the fear from an exit or a possible breakup of the euro area. In the US, even though in the US there are also a number of states which had very similar developments, for example, to Ireland, like huge credit and housing booms and so on, that nobody's talking about whether Nevada or Arizona or California or any other state would exit the United States or the dollar zone. While in Europe, unfortunately, there are a lot of talks about that. And I mean, in my view, that an exit would be a catastrophe. I mean, some people have different views, but I mean, if it would be a catastrophe, not just for the exiting country, but for the rest, and there is a non-zero probability that this would happen, then certainly it has an impact on investment, not just in the weaker countries, but also in the stronger countries. And the fourth issue that I would like to highlight is the way the decision making is made in Europe and in the US. I mean, the US, which is a federal state with a very strong federal government, certainly they can make strong decisions quickly and early on, and also able to assume the financial consequences. But in Europe, we all know that basically we are working in an intergovernmental way, which unfortunately is not the most efficient one. Now, what is the consequence? I mean, I told you that the euro area is somewhat lagging behind the US, but here I show a broader picture of the 5 major geographical regions of the European Union. I basically call them West, North, South, Central, and East. And the most striking feature of this chart is that Southern Europe is expected to fall behind. First of all, I mean, the EU 15 countries were not really able to catch up since the mid-1970s. There were some fluctuations. I mean, some catching up. For example, Ireland was an exception, but overall, Europe was not really able to catch up. Looking ahead, I mean, since growth forecasts are weaker in Europe, I mean, the whole European Union and euro area is expected to fall behind, but it's really, really dramatic in Southern Europe. And this leads me to the second point. I mean, Elena also nicely described that I mean, the Southern European countries face really, really major challenges and problems, and these are related largely to pre-crisis developments. Now, the way I summarize it, and not just also I, but many other people, is that basically there is a triple crisis, which is a balance of payment crisis, a banking crisis, and the sovereign debt crisis. Now, the balance of payment crisis manifested in increasing current account deficits and foreign indebtedness. I mean, Elena showed a chart on the aggregate. I also have the chart for these 5 major groups of the European Union. Now, Southern Europe is this yellow or golden color, which you can see. Indeed, there is an adjustment, so imbalances are shrinking. By the way, it's a very major contrast to what happened in Eastern Europe, which is dominated by the Baltic countries, when there was a sudden move toward the current account surplus. And I mean, the reason why Eastern Europe and Southern Europe is different in this respect is that the European Central Bank provides ample financing to banks in Southern Europe, and thereby it helps to maintain the current account deficits. But now the current account deficits themselves matter, because, I mean, certainly with the integrated Europe, we wish to have indeed capital flows from, let's say, to low productive area to high productive areas, so that's not bad per se. The problem if they lead to very high indebtedness and I mean also lead to unsustainable booms as one can, as also Elena described before the crisis. Now in this chart I show the net international investment position. I mean, the latest data is 2011, but I simply use the IMF forecast for the current account balance and the IMF forecast for nominal GDP growth, and basically simulated what would be the implied net external position of these countries. And I mean, what is basically a two striking issue is that in Southern Europe there's some deterioration and a very gradual improvement afterward. And if you look at the composition, unfortunately, Southern Europe has mostly that. But also the blue line is also striking, that Western Europe, which is consists of, in my grouping, Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, have an increasingly higher net external position. I mean, if a country has external assets, that's not a problem for these countries, but if a country has very high external debt that needs to be serviced and paid back, that's a major burden on the economy. And not just a burden on the economy, but market also realize that this is a major threat in the long-term external stability of these countries, and which again leads to the financial fragmentation and differentiation, as also Elena described. So let me come back to this chart. Now on the banking crisis, again Elena nicely described, so I don't want to discuss much, but certainly Europe has a major banking problem. And in Southern Europe, I mean, also, I mean, some of the sectors disappearing or reducing significantly. Like, for example, in Spain and Ireland, the share of construction in output was more than twice the average of the rest of the European Union. And also the income, I also see a very nice chart from the Commission showing that how much income Ireland had, for example, for sectors related to construction, and I don't know by heart, but it's a huge number which collapsed to a very, very small number. So clearly the banking issue was also major, and also it had an impact on the sovereign debt crisis that I mean, the permanent loss in these sectors and the revenues, coupled with the contraction in output, I mean, certainly increased suddenly sovereign debt problems of many of these countries. And we also have to acknowledge that the euro area membership highly constrains policy tools, because if these Southern European countries were not inside the euro area, then probably their currency would depreciate, which on the one hand would help, at least in the short term, to support economic growth, but also it would help to create inflation and thereby inflating away debt, both private debt and public debt. I worked for the central bank for more than a decade, and certainly I'm not a fan of inflation. But if you look at the historical episodes, how countries were able to deleverage, then I mean, inflation had in many cases a major role in that, and this is not in the hands of these countries, so they are bound to do the adjustment inside the euro area. Now my time is running, so let me come to some structural issues. Again, I 100% share Elena's comment that, I mean, structural reforms should be pursed. This may be a very complicated table, very big, so you will not be able to read it, so don't try. I'll just tell you what you can see. Basically, what we did is, there's a first panel on some medium-term issues which are related to growth and could be improved by structural reforms like labor market efficiency. On the bottom panel, you can see long-term issues like innovation and so on. And what you see is that, I mean, the major country groups is that, I mean, Northern Europe ranks quite well, Western Europe is moderate, Southern Europe is quite weak in a large number of aspects. Now, the question how we can measure the improvements in structural reforms, also Elena discussed, and we also participated recently in another debate in Brussels when she told me that Spain and many other countries introduced many various structural reforms which should help, and I also hope. The problem is it's very, very difficult to measure. So what I did a very basic, very simple thing, is that the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Index has various dimensions of underlying drivers of competitiveness which are related to structural reforms. Basically looked at the 12 major indicators they had, and they looked at the 2008-2009 report and the 2012-2013 report. So what you can see here in this table on the first data column is the rank and the score for 2008-2009, the second major data column for 2012 and 13, and then the last column, which is colored, you can see the change. And there are not many greens, which the green indicates improvements, but unfortunately there are many light reds, and I did the same exercise for Spain. And if I look at, for example, labor market efficiency, number 7 here, then at least so far I don't see an improvement. Now, everybody can question whether the World Economic Forum measures these reform efforts well or poorly, and I'm sure that the Commission has much better data or much more detailed information, but at least what an outside researcher can see is not really promising that as I said, 100% agree that structural reform agenda should be continued, but the progress unfortunately cannot be seen on available indicators. And now this is a really dramatic graph. This is what I call the Greek downward spiral. Here I show the same forecast for Greece that I showed earlier for the euro area and the US, and not just in every year, but in every half year. And what you can see is that in every half year, the Greek outlook was revised downward and downward and downward. And still, this does not yet indicate, because these are from the October version, the latest one of the IMF World Economic Outlook. And since then, Greek GDP has been also revised downward by about 3%. So the total output collapse in Greece will be about 25%. And the next chart shows the same for employment. Employment forecasts are only made for 2 years ahead, so the charts are not that long. Also, what you see is that in every update, employment forecasts were revised downward and downward and downward. And now the cumulative employment loss in Greece is expected to be 21% from 2008 to 2013, which is really, really dramatic, and I think that's a major problem. And I also think that the Greek situation has not yet been well addressed, and there is a negative feedback between high public debt and very weak outlook when there are expectations of euro area exit. But let me speed up a bit because my time is elapsing. So what are the challenges in Southern Europe? Unit labor costs have declined in a number of countries, but largely due to a faster collapse of employment than the collapse of output. And there was unfortunately a very limited wage adjustment. Now, Elena also showed a chart that there was some adjustment, but quite limited compared to the very high unemployment rates, which raises questions how the competitiveness could be improved. The private sector is heavily indebted and deleverages. Elena also described it nicely, so I don't want to spend on that. The external debt is very high and even increases the share of GDP due to the collapse of GDP, which again assessed by markets. And there is also, the bank balance sheets are still quite compromised in these countries, and we see a major fragmentation of financial markets. Elena also had a chart on that, which leads to very limited access to finance, but when there is no access to finance, then there is no growth either. I think that since there is a risk that Greece may exit the euro, as I said, I hope it won't, but there is a risk. I think it also has a negative impact on the rest of the euro area, but let me come to my final few slides. Now, what was the EU policy response? And here, I hope that Commission speakers will enlighten me if I'm too critical or not, does not describe sufficiently. Now, on the balance of payment problem, basically there is much more intensified coordination and advice. And the macroeconomic imbalances procedure were designed, which we discussed in detail last year, and also the European semester is now we had the second round, and the Commission just started the next round 2 days ago with the annual growth survey. Now, my colleague at Bruegel looked at the experiences of the first 2 European semesters and concluded that, certainly all the proposals which are typically made to countries are justified, but there is a major problem that, first of all, there are no proper priorities are not set, so each country receives about 3-5 suggestions, and it's not told them which are the most important ones, and also the cross-country spillover effects are not really taken into account. And an example of what was suggested for Germany, which has a very large current account surplus, certainly it should make a role in the adjustment of intra-European Union imbalances. The 5 suggestions was, the first one is the full implementation of the German debt brake. The second one is increased spending on education and research. The third one is addressing financial sector weaknesses, including state-level banks. The fourth one is reducing the tax wedge, so the excessive taxing of labor. And the fifth one is the reform of the energy sector, which are all, very nice suggestions. But none of relate to how to solve the current problems that the European Union face, which one is rebalancing, that there should be the rebalancing between Germany and the other countries, and another is certainly that the Europe growth forecast is very weak, and certainly Germany has the best fiscal situation to have that. Now on the banking crisis, I have to say I'm extremely optimistic, so I don't want to spend on time that. So the banking union project is extremely ambitious, and I hope that the Commission proposal will go through, and not just with the first step with this single supervisory mechanism, but also later with the common resolution and deposit insurance scheme. Now on the sovereign debt, the response was many pack, the 6-pack, the Euro Plus pack, the fiscal compact, and the forthcoming two-pack, which aim at, stronger fiscal rules and institutions, surveillance and sanctions. There was also conditional lending to sovereigns. And there was also a specific compact for growth, which was agreed at the June summit, which reiterated the major targets, which again, growth-friendly consolidation and all of these things are very important. But unfortunately, it gives very limited concrete measures. So I'm running out of my time. I'm at 24 minutes now, and I have to speak about only 20. So just quickly on what to do. Basically, on what to do, the 3 or 6 major items should be addressed. So, Euro exit fears should be addressed first. I think that should be the first and utmost priority. The balance of payment crisis should be addressed. The banking crisis should be addressed. The sovereign debt crisis should be addressed. There should be specific EU-wide measures for economic growth. And also somehow the executive and democratic deficits that the European Union and the euro area face should also be addressed. And these are my last 2 slides. So very quickly, just on exit, I say that I think that even though I describe many major problems for Southern European countries, I think that it is not the way to exit, and I list basically 2 issues which gives at least hope that it is possible. One, which is also Elena mentioned, that exports in some of these countries, including Spain, but also Portugal and Ireland, are picking up very well. And the second one, which is a chart here from a recent publication of the World Bank, which shows the productivity levels on the left-hand side and the growth of value added on the right-hand side for companies in some European Union countries, according to ownership, whether the company is domestic or foreign-owned. And what we can see is that even in Spain and Italy, when there are foreign-owned companies, then they are properly managed, then they have productivity level similar to let's say, productivity level of Sweden or Belgium or Norway, and they also has had a much faster economic growth. So it doesn't mean that it's impossible to do good business in Southern Europe, but it means it's very difficult because there are various barriers to growth. Now, so what to do? So just one sentence on each of the 6. On exit fears, I think the first should be restoring Greece public debt sustainability, and the agreement which was reached on Monday this week does not really address this issue. Also, progress with the banking union would be a great step, so I look forward to the meeting next week, what progress can be made. Now, the balance of payment crisis, Elena also talked about improving the structural issues. She also told that it takes a long time. I 100% agree. She also mentioned that it's good that wages are somewhat rising in the Western European countries, which is also good. I would add 2 more items, is that I'm very brave saying fiscal expansion in the stronger countries of Northern Europe, but clearly I think there would be a need for a slowdown in fiscal consolidation, and the weaker euro would also help. Now, the banking crisis, we have 100% agreement, banks should be cleaned up, and the banking union project should continue. Now, the sovereign debt crisis, the European Central Bank's recent outright monetary transactions worked very well, and it should be put in place. Restoring Greek public debt sustainability, I think, is inevitable for addressing the risk. I'm also in favor of specific form of Eurobonds. We can also discuss it a little bit later. And certainly, the core of the sovereign debt sustainability is economic growth. If there is no economic growth, then no sovereign is sustainable. So all measures which are supporting growth are important. Now, some specific measures, the European Investment Program, I think, would be needed. The June summit agreed giving some more capital to the European Investment Bank and using the annual structural funds, but these are still minor and does not really progress. There's a good initiative that now talks about a fiscal capacity for the euro area, which may also help, and also a point that we were always looking at country by country, but unfortunately we were not so far able to look at the euro area overall fiscal stance and fiscal policy. Institutional changes would be needed to do that. And the last point, how to address the executive and democratic deficits, that's very difficult, so I don't want to spend time on that. So thank you for your attention.